The gunshot echoed through the canyon just as Delilah Turner realized her 5-year-old son was no longer holding her hand. And in that moment of pure terror, she understood that everything she had built in this unforgiving land could shatter like glass against stone. She spun around, her worn calico dress catching on the rough wooden edge of the general store's porch in Trinidad, Colorado, where she had stopped only moments before to adjust the packages in her arms. The autumn afternoon sun of 1878 cast long shadows across the dusty Main Street, and her heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst through her chest. Samuel. Her voice cracked as she called for her boy, the packages tumbling from her grasp, their contents spilling across the weathered planks. Flour, sugar, the precious tin of coffee she had saved 3 months to afford. None of it mattered. Samuel. Other townspeople turned to look, some with concern, others with that practiced indifference that came from living in a place where tragedy was as common as tumbleweeds. Delilah stumbled down the steps, her eyes scanning frantically in every direction. He had been right there beside her, his small fingers wrapped around 2 of hers, chattering about the horses he had seen at the livery stable. "Madam, what's wrong?" A woman's voice cut through her panic, but Delilah barely registered it. "My son. My little boy, he was just here. Samuel. He's 5 years old, brown hair, wearing a blue shirt and brown trousers. Have you seen him?" The words tumbled out in a desperate rush as she grabbed the woman's arm. The woman, elderly with kind eyes, shook her head. "I just came outside, dear, but we'll help you look. Thomas." She called to a man emerging from the feed store. "This woman's boy has gone missing." Within minutes, a small group had gathered, but each passing second felt like an eternity stretching into forever. Delilah's mind raced through terrible possibilities. The canyon, the river, the rough men who sometimes passed through town, the mountain lions that had been spotted near the outskirts just last week. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. "When did you last see him?" Thomas asked, his weathered face serious. "Not 5 minutes ago. We were right here. I was getting ready to carry our supplies to the wagon, and I let go of his hand for just a moment to shift the packages, and then I heard that gunshot, and when I looked down, he was gone." Her voice broke on the last word. "That shot came from down by the saloon," Thomas said. "Some cowhand probably celebrating his wages, but it might have startled the boy, made him run off. We need to search. Now, please." Delilah's hands shook as she clutched at her skirts, already moving toward the edge of the porch to descend the steps again. "He doesn't know the town well. We only moved here 3 months ago." The group began to disperse, calling Samuel's name, checking between buildings, looking into doorways and alleyways. Delilah ran from place to place, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. She could not break. Not now. She had to find him. She thought of her husband, Michael, buried in the churchyard on the hill overlooking town. He had died 6 months ago from pneumonia, leaving her alone with Samuel and a small piece of land that was more rocks than soil. She had moved to Trinidad hoping for a fresh start, hoping the mining community would offer work, opportunities, something better than the failing farm where she had buried her dreams along with her husband. "Samuel." Her voice was growing hoarse. She checked behind the blacksmith shop, in the narrow space between the bank and the land office, even in the abandoned chicken coop behind the boarding house. Nothing. No sign of him anywhere. The sun was sinking lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that seemed to mock her terror. How long had it been? 15 minutes? 20? It felt like hours. She ran back toward the main street, her lungs burning, and nearly collided with a tall figure leading a dappled gray horse. "Easy there, madam." Strong hands steadied her, and she looked up into a face she had seen around town but never really noticed before. The man was perhaps in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of summer grass. He wore the dusty clothes of a ranch hand, a worn leather vest over a faded shirt, and there was genuine concern in his expression. "What's got you running like the devil's on your heels, my son? He's missing. Have you seen a little boy, 5 years old, brown hair, blue shirt?" She barely registered what he looked like, seeing only another person who might help, might know something. The cowboy's expression shifted immediately to one of focused attention. "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe more." We were at the general store, and I let go of his hand for just a moment, and he vanished. She hated how her voice shook, how weak she sounded, but she was beyond pride. Did he have a favorite place? Something that might catch his attention? The cowboy's voice was calm, steady, and something about it made her feel like she could breathe just slightly easier. "He loves horses." He was talking about the horses at the livery stable before we went into the store. She pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to think through the panic. "But we already checked there. Thomas checked there first thing." Thomas Murphy, the feed store owner. When she nodded, the cowboy's jaw tightened. "Thomas couldn't find his own boots if they were on his feet. I'm Garrett Xander. I work at the Patterson Ranch east of town, and I know every hiding spot in this place because I've pulled more than one lost calf out of trouble." He tied his horse to the nearest post with swift, efficient movements. "We're going to find your boy." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty of it, made her want to believe him. "Delilah Turner," she managed, "and my son's name is Samuel." "All right, Mrs. Turner, tell me exactly what happened, everything you remember, no detail too small." Garrett was already moving, his eyes scanning the street, and she hurried to keep pace with him. She repeated the story, trying to remember every single thing. The packages, the gunshot, Samuel's chatter about horses. Garrett listened intently, asking questions. Had Samuel seemed excited about anything in particular? Had he mentioned wanting to see something? Had anyone unusual been in the store with them? "There was a prospector," Delilah said suddenly. "He was buying supplies, talking about finding color up in the mountains." Samuel asked him about it, about the gold, and the man laughed and said maybe the boy would be a prospector too someday. "Which direction did the prospector go when he left?" "I don't know. I was paying for our things." Fresh fear spiked through her. "You don't think?" "I don't think anything yet. Just gathering facts." Garrett's voice remained steady, but she saw his hand rest briefly on the pistol at his hip. Did the man seem interested in Samuel? Did he pay him unusual attention? No, he was kind, but just in passing. He seemed more interested in getting his supplies and heading out. She racked her memory. He said something about making camp before dark. They had reached the livery stable again, and Garrett called out to the owner, a grizzled man named Pete who was brushing down a chestnut mare. "Pete, you see a little boy come through here in the last half hour. 5 years old, brown hair." "Not a soul except you and the widow Turner earlier," Pete said, pausing in his work. "Why, the boy gone missing since about 25 minutes ago. He loves horses." "You're sure you haven't seen him?" "Positive. But I was in the back tack room for a spell, fixing a broken bridle. I suppose he could have slipped past." Pete set down his brush. "Want me to check the loft? Boys love climbing up there." "I'll do it." Garrett was already moving toward the ladder. "Mrs. Turner, stay here with Pete." But Delilah could not just stand still. She moved deeper into the stable, calling Samuel's name, checking each stall even though Pete had said he had seen nothing. The horses stamped and snorted, and the smell of hay and animal musk filled her nose. She reached the last stall and looked over the gate, seeing only a placid bay gelding who regarded her with mild curiosity. "He's not in the loft." Garrett called down, descending the ladder with quick agility. His face showed frustration but not defeat. Where else would a boy interested in horses want to go? The Patterson Ranch, Pete offered. They've got the finest horses in the county, but that's 3 miles out. A boy couldn't walk that far in this time. No, but he could follow the road thinking he was heading that way. Garrett's eyes met Delilah's, and she saw him making calculations. The road east passes by Fuller's Canyon. There's an old line shack about a mile out that kids sometimes play in when they wander too far from town. Fuller's Canyon. Delilah's blood ran cold. She had heard about Fuller's Canyon, about how treacherous it was, how easy it would be to slip on the loose shale and fall. We have to go there, now. I'll get my horse. Pete, spread the word about where we're headed. Get some other men to search the western edge of town just in case I'm wrong about the direction. Garrett was already moving, untying his gray horse from the post where he had left it. Mrs. Turner, can you ride? Yes. She had learned as a girl, though it had been months since she had been on horseback. Money was too tight to keep a horse. They had only the old mule that pulled their wagon. Then you're coming with me. It'll be faster than trying to rig up a wagon. He swung into the saddle with an easy grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle, then reached down to her. Put your foot on mine and grab my arm. She hesitated only a second before doing as he said. His grip was strong and sure, and he pulled her up behind him as if she weighed nothing. Hold on tight. We're going to move fast. Delilah wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him through his shirt, and then they were flying. The horse leaped into a gallop, and the town blurred past them. The wind whipped her hair loose from its pins, and she pressed her face against Garrett's back, holding on with all her strength as terror and hope warred within her. The road east was rutted and dusty, winding through scrubby vegetation and scattered rocks. The mountains rose in the distance, their peaks touched with the gold of the setting sun. Usually Delilah would have found the landscape beautiful, but now it seemed hostile, full of danger. How far could Samuel have gone? Could he really have walked this far? There are some things you should know, Garrett called back to her over the thunder of hooves. Fuller's Canyon has a creek running through it. If Samuel went that way and got turned around, he might have followed the water. Kids do that when they're lost, follow water because it feels safe. But the canyon. She could barely say the words. If he fell. The canyon isn't sheer on all sides. There are slopes, places where a small person could make their way down safely even if an adult would struggle. And the creek isn't deep this time of year. Try to hold on to hope, Mrs. Turner. She wanted to. God, how she wanted to. But hope felt like a fragile thing, ready to shatter at any moment. They rode on, and she found herself praying, something she had not done much since Michael died. Please, please, please. Let him be safe. Let us find him. I cannot lose him too. The minutes stretched. Garrett never slowed the horse's pace, and Delilah was grateful for his skill as a rider because the road grew rougher, the terrain more challenging. They passed the turn-off to the Patterson Ranch, and ahead she could see where the land fell away into the canyon, a gash in the earth lined with scrubby trees and loose rock. Garrett finally slowed the horse as they approached, his eyes scanning the ground. Look for small footprints, anything disturbed. Samuel's a curious boy, you said. He might have left the road to look at something. They dismounted, and Delilah's legs nearly gave way beneath her, shaky from the ride and from fear. Garrett steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then immediately began studying the roadside. The light was fading, and she realized with a fresh spike of panic that they would lose the sun within the hour. There. Garrett pointed to a spot where the dirt showed clear disturbance, small prints heading off the road toward a cluster of juniper trees. That could be him. They hurried forward, following the trail. Delilah called Samuel's name again and again, her voice echoing off the canyon walls. They pushed through the junipers, and beyond them the land sloped sharply downward. Her heart sank. If Samuel had tried to climb down here. Look! Garrett pointed again, and she saw what he saw. A scrap of blue fabric caught on a branch halfway down the slope. That's his shirt? Yes. Oh God, yes. She started forward, but Garrett caught her arm. Let me go first. The ground's unstable here. Follow exactly where I step. His voice was firm but kind, and she nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They made their way down carefully, Garrett testing each foothold before putting his weight on it, reaching back to help her over the most treacherous spots. The scrap of fabric fluttered in the breeze, seeming to mock them with how small it was, how easily torn away. What else had been torn away? But then, filtering up from below, came a sound that made Delilah's heart stop and then restart with painful force, a child's sob. Samuel! She tried to push past Garrett, but he held her back. Careful, we're almost there. Samuel, he called out. Samuel Turner, can you hear me? My name is Garrett. I'm here with your mother. Mama! The voice was small, frightened, but blessedly alive. Mama, I'm stuck. We're coming, baby. Just stay still. Delilah's voice broke on the words, relief and terror still mixed in equal measure. Stuck could mean so many things, some of them terrible. They made it down the rest of the slope, half sliding over the loose shale, and then they rounded a large boulder, and there he was. Samuel sat on a narrow ledge above the creek, his face streaked with tears and dirt, his blue shirt torn at the shoulder, cradling his left arm against his chest. But he was alive. He was whole. Mama! He tried to stand, and Garrett moved with surprising speed, climbing across the rocks to reach him before he could lose his balance. Easy there, partner. Let's not make your mother's heart stop twice in one day. Garrett's voice was gentle as he reached Samuel, crouching beside him on the ledge. Can you tell me what hurts? My arm. I fell on it. Samuel's lower lip trembled, but he was trying so hard to be brave. I heard a loud noise and I got scared, and I saw horses going this way and I wanted to see them, but then I got lost and I tried to climb down to the water and I slipped. Delilah finally reached them, her hands shaking as she touched her son's face, his hair, his shoulder, needing to confirm he was real. It's all right. You're all right now. I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to leave. I just wanted to see the horses. Fresh tears spilled down his cheeks. I know, baby. I know. She pulled him carefully into her arms, mindful of his injured arm, and let herself cry too. Relief was a physical thing, loosening the terrible knot in her chest, making her whole body tremble. Garrett examined Samuel's arm with gentle, competent hands. I don't think it's broken, but it's definitely hurt. We need to get him to Doc Hartley in town. Can you carry him up the slope, Mrs. Turner, or should I? I will. But even as she said it, she realized the climb would be difficult with Samuel in her arms, especially with her legs still shaking from fear and exertion. Let me, Garrett said. You're exhausted and the climb's treacherous. I'll carry him up and then we'll all ride back together. She wanted to protest, but practicality won. She nodded, and Garrett lifted Samuel with easy strength, settling the boy against his chest. Samuel, worn out from fear and pain, rested his head on Garrett's shoulder without protest. The climb back up took longer, all of them moving carefully in the fading light. Delilah's hands scraped against rocks, and she felt her dress tear on the underbrush, but none of it mattered. Samuel was safe. That was all that mattered. When they finally reached level ground, Garrett settled Samuel on his horse, then helped Delilah up behind her son. She wrapped her arms around Samuel, holding him close, and Garrett swung up in front of them both. It was a tight fit, all three of them on one horse, but the gray was strong and took their combined weight without complaint. "You're safe now," Garrett said quietly, glancing back at them as he turned the horse toward town. "And you'll never face that fear alone again, Mrs. Turner. I give you my word." She did not fully understand what he meant, but something in his tone made her believe him. The ride back to town was slower, all of them careful of Samuel's arm, and darkness fell around them. Stars began to appear overhead, cold and bright, and Delilah found herself watching the back of Garrett Xander's head, wondering about this man who had dropped everything to help her, who had known where to look, who had brought her son back to her. By the time they reached Trinidad, word had spread that the boy had been found. People came out onto the street as they passed, and Pete from the livery stable jogged alongside them for a moment. "You found him. Thank the Lord. Doc Hartley's waiting at his office." Garrett rode straight there, and the doctor, a portly man with kind eyes and steady hands, took Samuel immediately. He examined the boy's arm while Delilah hovered anxiously, and Garrett stood quietly by the door, his hat in his hands. "Badly sprained but not broken," Doc Hartley announced after several minutes of careful probing that made Samuel whimper but stay brave. "He'll need to keep it still for a few weeks. I'll make a sling." He looked at Delilah. "You got lucky, Mrs. Turner. This could have been much worse." "I know." She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting a fresh wave of tears. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank Garrett here. He's the one who knew where to look." Doc Hartley was wrapping Samuel's arm with practiced efficiency. "You've got good instincts, son." Garrett just nodded, looking uncomfortable with the praise. He met Delilah's eyes across the room, and she saw something there, a warmth and a concern that went beyond what a stranger might feel. It stirred something in her, something she had thought died with Michael. After Doc Hartley finished, Delilah realized with a sinking feeling that she had no way to pay him. The money she had was still scattered across the general store porch with her packages, if it was even still there. "Doctor, I need to explain something," she began, her cheeks burning with shame. "Already taken care of," Garrett said quietly from the doorway. He had apparently stepped out at some point and returned. "Your packages are loaded in your wagon, which is outside. I paid the doctor and the store. You can pay me back when you're able." Delilah stared at him, shocked. "I can't accept that. That's too much." "Yes, you can." His voice was firm. "Your boy needs tending and you need to get home and rest. We'll sort out the details later." She wanted to argue, but she was so tired, and Samuel was drooping against her, exhausted from his ordeal. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you. We'll figure it out." He smiled at her, a small, genuine smile that made him look younger. "Come on. Let me help you get Samuel to your wagon." He carried Samuel out into the cool evening air and placed him gently in the back of the wagon on a nest of blankets. Delilah climbed up onto the seat, and Garrett stood there looking up at her, his hand resting on the wagon's side. "Your place is the old Henderson property about 2 miles north, right?" When she nodded, surprised he knew, he continued, "I'll ride out tomorrow to check on Samuel, make sure his arm's healing proper." "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to." His eyes held hers, and something passed between them, unspoken but powerful. "You shouldn't have to face things alone, Mrs. Turner. Not anymore." Before she could respond, he stepped back and tipped his hat to her, then swung onto his own horse and rode off into the night. Delilah sat there for a moment, watching him go, her heart doing strange things in her chest. Then Samuel called softly from the back, and she shook herself from her thoughts and guided the mule toward home. The small house looked lonely in the moonlight when they arrived, just a rough cabin with a sagging porch and a vegetable garden that was more weeds than plants. But it was home. She got Samuel inside and into bed, giving him some willow bark tea that Doc Hartley had sent along for the pain. Samuel fell asleep almost immediately, one hand curled under his cheek, looking so young and vulnerable that her heart ached. She sat beside his bed for a long time, watching him breathe, thanking God that he was safe. And she thought about Garrett Xander, about his capable hands and steady voice, about the way he had looked at her in the doctor's office, about his promise that she would never face that fear alone again. She told herself it was nothing, that he was just a kind man doing a good deed. But part of her, a part she had thought closed off forever after Michael's death, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something more. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost on the ground that sparkled in the early sunlight. Delilah woke to find Samuel already up, sitting at the kitchen table with his injured arm in its sling, eating the cornbread she had made the day before with more enthusiasm than she had seen in weeks. "How's your arm feeling?" she asked, checking the sling to make sure it was still properly positioned. "It hurts, but not as bad as yesterday." He looked up at her with solemn eyes. "I'm really sorry, Mama. I won't run off again, I promise." "I know you won't." She kissed the top of his head. "But we need to talk about what happened, about why it was dangerous. You understand that you scared me very badly." "I didn't mean to. I just heard the gunshot and it was so loud. And then I saw these really pretty horses with spots on them, and I wanted to see where they were going, and I didn't think about how far I was walking." His voice got smaller. "And then I realized I didn't know where I was, and I was scared, and I tried to find my way back, but everything looked the same, and then I fell." Delilah pulled up a chair beside him. "I understand that you didn't mean to scare me, but Samuel, this is the frontier. It's not safe for little boys to wander off alone. There are dangerous animals, dangerous places, dangerous people sometimes. I need you to promise me that you'll stay close to me when we're in town, and that you'll never leave our property without telling me where you're going." "I promise." He looked genuinely contrite. "Is Mr. Xander really coming to check on me today?" He said he would. Delilah felt her cheeks warm at the mention of Garrett. "He was very helpful yesterday. I liked him. He was nice to me, and he didn't yell at me for being stupid." Samuel picked at his cornbread, "And he carried me all the way up that big hill without even breathing hard. You weren't stupid. You were scared and made a mistake. There's a difference." She stood to prepare a proper breakfast, slicing bacon from their dwindling supply and starting to mix batter for flapjacks. And yes, Mr. Xander was very kind. They were just finishing breakfast when they heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Samuel perked up immediately. "Is that him?" Delilah went to the window and looked out, her heart doing that strange flutter again. Sure enough, Garrett Xander was riding up the path to their house, sitting easy in his saddle, his hat pulled low against the morning sun. She quickly checked her reflection in the small mirror by the door, tucking stray hair back into her bun, then felt foolish for caring what she looked like. She opened the door as he dismounted, tying his horse to the porch rail. "Good morning, Mr. Xander." "Morning, Mrs. Turner." "I hope I'm not calling too early." He climbed the porch steps, and she noticed he held a wrapped package in one hand. "Thought I'd check on the patient. Not too early at all. We've just finished breakfast." She stepped back to let him enter, very aware of how small and shabby the cabin must seem. The furniture was old and mismatched, the curtains faded, the whole place showing signs of hard times and harder work. But Garrett did not seem to notice or care. His attention went immediately to Samuel, who was grinning widely from his seat at the table. "How's that arm feeling, partner?" "Better. Mama says I have to keep the sling on for weeks, though." Samuel made a face. "Your mama's right. You want that arm to heal strong so you can use it proper." Garrett held out the package. "I brought you something. Hope it's all right, Mrs. Turner. You didn't have to bring anything." Delilah felt overwhelmed by his continued kindness. First paying for the doctor and the store goods, now bringing gifts. I know, but I saw it in the general store and thought Samuel might like it. He handed the package to the boy, who tore into it with his good hand, revealing a small wooden horse, beautifully carved with a flowing mane and tail. Samuel's eyes went wide. For me? Really? Really? I know you like horses, and I figured after yesterday you might appreciate one you can keep close without having to chase after it. Garrett's smile was warm as he watched Samuel's delight. Thank you. Look, Mama, look how pretty it is. Samuel clutched the toy to his chest, then carefully examined every detail of the carving. It looks just like the spotted horses I saw yesterday. It's called an Appaloosa, Garrett told him. They're bred by the Nez Perce people up north, fine horses, smart and strong. Delilah watched the exchange, her heart melting a little at the sight of this rough cowboy being so gentle with her son. Samuel had not had a man's attention since Michael died, and she had not realized until this moment how much he must have missed it. Mr. Xander, would you like some coffee? It's the least I can offer after everything you've done. She moved toward the stove where the pot was still hot. I'd appreciate that, thank you. And please call me Garrett. Mr. Xander makes me feel like my father. He settled into the chair across from Samuel, his long legs barely fitting under the small table. She poured coffee into 2 of her mismatched cups and brought them to the table, sitting down with them. For a few minutes, they talked about easy things: the weather, the town, Samuel's progress with his reading lessons. Garrett had an easy way about him, comfortable and genuine, and Delilah found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around men. I need to talk to you about the money, she finally said when Samuel had wandered over to the window to look at Garrett's horse. I can't just accept what you paid as a gift. I need to repay you. Garrett wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, studying her face. All right. Then we'll work something out. I'm not worried about it. But I am. I don't take charity. She kept her voice low so Samuel would not hear, but firm. I've worked hard to keep us going since my husband died, and I won't be beholden. I respect that. He took a sip of coffee. Truth is, I could use some help at my place. I've got a small parcel of land, about 50 acres, where I run a few horses and cattle. The Patterson Ranch is my main employment, but I'm building something of my own on the side. I've been meaning to hire someone to help with mending tack, cooking meals during roundup, maybe some sewing work. My clothes are falling apart, as you can probably see. He gestured to his shirt, which did indeed show several careful but inexpert repairs. If you'd be willing to do that kind of work, I'd consider us square. Delilah considered this. It was clearly a fabricated arrangement, something he was offering to preserve her pride, but the work itself was real enough, and she did need income. The small amount of money Michael had left was nearly gone, and the land they owned was too poor to farm properly. She had been sewing and taking in laundry from some of the miners, but it was barely enough. I can do all those things, she said finally. But I want to be clear that this is employment, not charity dressed up as such. Understood. You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Turner. But he was smiling, and she found herself smiling back. And I suppose if you're going to employ me, you should call me Delilah. Delilah. He said her name carefully, as if tasting it. It's a pretty name. She felt her cheeks warm and looked down at her coffee cup. It had been so long since a man had given her a compliment, even such a simple one. Thank you. They worked out the details over the next half hour. She would come to his place 3 times a week to do the work he needed, and he would provide supplies for meals she cooked. Samuel could come with her. Garrett said the boy could help with small chores if his arm allowed, or just explore the property under supervision. The arrangement would continue until the debt was paid, and then they would renegotiate if she wanted to continue working for him. It was all very proper and businesslike, but underneath, Delilah felt the current of something else, something that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts scatter. She told herself she was being foolish, reading things into kindness that were not there. Garrett was probably just lonely, living out at his place by himself, and welcomed the company and the help. But when he stood to leave, and his hand brushed hers as he reached for his hat, the jolt of awareness that went through her suggested otherwise. And when he looked back at her from his saddle, his green eyes holding hers for a long moment before he rode away, she knew she was not imagining things. "I like him, Mama," Samuel announced after Garrett had disappeared down the path. "He's nice, and he knows lots of things about horses. He does seem kind," Delilah agreed carefully, turning away from the window. She had work to do, no time to stand around mooning over a cowboy like some foolish girl. But as she went about her chores that day, washing dishes and sweeping floors and checking on the chickens, she caught herself humming and realized with a start that she was happy. Genuinely happy, for the first time in longer than she could remember. The days that followed fell into a new rhythm. 3 times a week, Delilah hitched up the mule to their wagon and drove with Samuel to Garrett's property, a neat homestead tucked into a valley about 4 miles from their own place. The house was small but well built, better than their own cabin, with a solid barn and several corrals where Garrett kept his horses. The first day she arrived to work, Garrett showed her around with obvious pride. "Built most of it myself over the past 3 years," he explained as they walked from the house to the barn. "The Patterson Ranch has been good to me, taught me everything I know about ranching and paid fair wages. I've saved most of what I earned, planning for the future." "It's impressive," Delilah said honestly. The property was clearly the work of someone with skill and dedication. Everything was orderly and well maintained, from the whitewashed fences to the carefully organized tack room in the barn. "You should be proud." "I am. But it's lonely sometimes, just me and the animals." He glanced at her sideways. "It's nice having folks around. Samuel, you want to help me feed the horses?" Samuel, who had been practically vibrating with excitement since they arrived, eagerly followed Garrett to the barn, pelting him with questions about every horse they passed. Delilah watched them go, her heart doing that strange flutter again, then shook herself and got to work. The work was hard but satisfying. She mended Garrett's clothes, finding them worn but good quality, the kind a man would buy intending them to last. She cooked meals that they all shared, using supplies from Garrett's well-stocked pantry, and found herself taking extra care to make things taste good. She cleaned and organized his house, which was tidy for a bachelor's quarters but clearly lacked a woman's touch. And as she worked, she got to know Garrett better. He was 27, she learned, originally from Wyoming. His parents had died when he was 15, and he had made his own way since then, working on various ranches across Colorado and Wyoming before settling near Trinidad. He was a hard worker, honest and fair, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her into laughter more than once. He was also good with Samuel, patient and kind, teaching the boy how to groom a horse properly, showing him how to mend a bridle, telling him stories about life on the range. Samuel blossomed under the attention, and Delilah saw him smile and laugh more in those weeks than he had in the 6 months since Michael's death. She tried not to read too much into Garrett's kindness, tried to tell herself it was just his nature, that he would be this way with anyone. But there were moments that made her heart race and her breath catch. The way he looked at her sometimes, with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. The way he found excuses to stand close to her, to brush her hand when passing her something, to steady her elbow when she climbed down from the wagon. One afternoon in late October, about 3 weeks after Samuel's rescue, Delilah was hanging laundry on the line behind Garrett's house when she heard raised voices from the direction of the barn. She hurried around the building to find Garrett facing down 3 rough-looking men on horseback, his stance tense, his hand near his gun. "I told you, we're not interested in selling," Garrett was saying, his voice hard. "Move along." "Now that's not very neighborly." The speaker was a big man with a scarred face and mean eyes. "We're offering a fair price for those Appaloosas of yours. You'd be smart to take it. And I'm saying no. Those horses aren't for sale." Garrett's voice was steady, but Delilah could see the tension in his shoulders. "Maybe you need some time to think about it." The scarred man's hand moved toward his own gun, and Delilah's heart leaped into her throat. Without thinking, she stepped forward, making her presence known. "Mr. Xander, I've finished the laundry. Did you need me to start on supper?" All 4 men turned to look at her. Garrett's jaw tightened, but some of the tension left his stance. "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Turner. I'll be along shortly." He turned back to the men, his voice taking on a different tone. "As you can see, I have company. I'll ask you one more time politely to leave my property." The scarred man's eyes flicked between Garrett and Delilah, calculating. Finally, he spat in the dirt and yanked his horse's reins. "We'll be back. Think about our offer." The 3 men wheeled their horses and rode off, raising dust. Garrett stood watching them until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned to Delilah. "You shouldn't have come out here. Those men are dangerous." "That's exactly why I came out. They were threatening you." She crossed her arms, her heart still pounding. "Who were they?" "Horse thieves, probably. There's been a gang operating in the area, stealing horses and selling them over the border. They've been trying to buy legitimate horses too, to mix in with the stolen ones, make them harder to trace." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "My Appaloosas are valuable and they know it." "Will they come back?" Delilah thought of Samuel, playing in the barn with the wooden horse Garrett had given him. "Maybe, probably. I'll need to be more careful, keep watch at night." He looked at her and his expression softened. "Thank you for what you did. That was brave and probably foolish, but I appreciate it. I don't like bullies." She surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. "And I don't like people threatening someone who's been kind to us." Something shifted in Garrett's expression, something warm and wondering. He took a step toward her, then seemed to catch himself. "We should get Samuel and head inside. I don't think they'll try anything in broad daylight, but better safe than sorry." The rest of the day had an edge to it, both of them watchful and tense. When it came time for Delilah and Samuel to leave, Garrett insisted on riding escort back to their place, despite her protests that it was out of his way. "I won't sleep tonight if I don't know you got home safe," he said firmly. "Don't argue with me on this, Delilah." It was the first time he had used her given name without the Mrs. Turner attached, and the sound of it from his lips sent a shiver through her. She did not argue. They rode in silence, Samuel drowsing in the back of the wagon, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and red. When they reached her cabin, Garrett helped her down from the wagon seat, his hands lingering on her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Be careful," she said softly. "Those men looked like they meant business. I will. I've dealt with worse." But his eyes were serious. "You be careful too. Lock your doors at night. I don't trust those men not to do some scouting around, seeing what other properties might be easy targets." The thought sent a chill through her. Her cabin's locks were old and flimsy, and she was alone out here with Samuel. "I will." He seemed to read her fear because he added, "I'll ride out tomorrow, check on you both, and if you're nervous tonight, fire 3 shots in the air. I'll hear them and come running. You do that." She looked up at him, at this man who kept offering her protection and kindness, asking nothing in return except honest work. "Delilah, I told you that day I found Samuel. You'll never face that fear alone again. I meant it." His hand came up to cup her cheek, a gesture so tender and unexpected that her breath caught. "I meant every word." She stood frozen, looking up into his green eyes, seeing something there that made her heart race and her knees weak. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, and the air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Then Samuel called from the wagon, asking if he could bring his wooden horse inside, and the moment broke. Garrett dropped his hand and stepped back, clearing his throat. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," she agreed, her voice barely a whisper. She watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, her hand pressed to the cheek he had touched, her heart full of feelings she had not expected to ever feel again. Fear, yes, from the encounter with the horse thieves. But also hope and longing, and something that felt dangerously like falling in love. That night, she lay in bed unable to sleep, listening to every creak and rustle outside, starting at shadows. But she also replayed the moment when Garrett had touched her face, remembered the look in his eyes, and felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the blankets piled on her bed. She had loved Michael, loved him deeply and truly. But Michael had been her childhood sweetheart, familiar and safe. What she felt stirring for Garrett was different, built on gratitude and respect, yes, but also on something more primal, more intense. He made her feel protected but not diminished, cared for but not patronized. He saw her as a capable woman who had survived hardship, and he admired that strength even as he offered his own strength to shore up hers. She had told herself she would never marry again, never risk the pain of loss that came with loving someone. But Garrett was making her reconsider, making her think that maybe, just maybe, the risk was worth the reward. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with the smell of snow in the air. Delilah went about her morning chores with half her attention on the path, watching for Garrett's arrival. He came just after breakfast, riding up with his rifle across his saddle, his expression serious. "Had some trouble last night," he said without preamble as she came out onto the porch. "Someone tried to break into my barn. I heard them and fired a warning shot and they took off. But they'll be back." "Did you see who it was?" Delilah's hand went to her throat. "Too dark, but I'd bet money it was those same men from yesterday." He dismounted, tying his horse. "I'm thinking of asking the sheriff to post a deputy out my way for a few nights, until this gang moves on or gets caught." "That seems wise." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you sure you want us coming out to work for you while this is going on? I don't want to put Samuel in danger." "Actually, I was thinking maybe you and Samuel should stay at my place for a while." Garrett held up a hand before she could protest. "Just hear me out. Your cabin's isolated and those locks wouldn't keep out a determined cat, let alone men intent on mischief. My house has solid locks and I'll be there at night. You and Samuel could have the bedroom and I'll sleep in the barn with the horses. It would just be until this situation resolves." "Garrett, I can't impose on you like that." But even as she said it, she was thinking of the fear she had felt last night of how vulnerable they were out here. It's not an imposition. It's common sense. He moved closer, his eyes searching hers. "Please, Delilah, I need to know you're safe. I can't be out here watching your place and also protecting my own. If you're at my place, that's one less thing I have to worry about." The way he said it, the raw concern in his voice, made her throat tight. "Let me think about it. Talk to Samuel. All right, but think fast. I've got a bad feeling about those men." She invited him in for coffee, and they talked about practical matters while Samuel played with his wooden horse. Garrett's concern was evident, and his arguments were sound. Her cabin was isolated and indefensible. His property was more secure, and having her and Samuel there would actually help him, give him fewer places to worry about protecting. Finally, she agreed. They would pack up what they needed and move to Garrett's place temporarily, just until the threat passed. Samuel was thrilled at the prospect of staying where the horses were, and Delilah tried to ignore the flutter of nerves in her stomach at the thought of living under the same roof as Garrett, even temporarily. They spent the day packing, and then making the trip to Garrett's homestead. He helped her bring in their things, setting them up in his bedroom, which was simply furnished but clean. He had changed the sheets, she noticed, and put fresh flowers from his garden in a jar on the small table by the window. "I'll be comfortable in the barn," he assured her when she protested again about taking his room. "I've slept in worse places, believe me. You and Samuel need proper beds and walls." That first night in Garrett's house felt strange and intimate all at once. Delilah made supper for all of them, a hearty stew with dumplings, and they ate together at his table. Garrett told stories that made Samuel laugh, and Delilah found herself relaxing despite the circumstances. There was something right about this, about the three of them together, that felt like the beginnings of a family. After Samuel went to bed, exhausted from the excitement of the day, Garrett and Delilah sat on the porch in the cool evening air. He had his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness beyond the circle of lamplight from the house. "Thank you for this," Delilah said quietly. "I know I protested, but I do feel safer here." "Good, that's what matters." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Your husband, Michael, you loved him." The question was asked carefully without judgment, but she could hear the real question underneath it. "I did. Very much." She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "We grew up together, married young. He was a good man, a good father. When he died, I thought my heart would never work right again. I'm sorry." Garrett's voice was soft. "That kind of loss, it changes a person. It does." She looked at him, at his profile in the lamplight, strong and honest. "But people heal too, slowly in their own time." "I didn't think I would, but I'm starting to." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I'm glad. You deserve happiness, Delilah. You and Samuel both. So do you." The words came out before she could stop them. "You're a good man, Garrett Xander. Better than most I've known. Some woman is going to be very lucky someday. Maybe." His eyes never left hers. "If I'm very lucky myself, maybe she'll be a widow with a brave little boy and a heart big enough to risk loving again." The air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Delilah's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Garrett, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon and you've been through so much, but I want you to know, I care about you, about both of you. This isn't just about the debt or about being neighborly. I care." She could not speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the honesty in his voice, by the feelings surging up inside her. "I care too," she finally whispered. "It scares me how much." He reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and strong. "Fear isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes it means something matters. Something's worth protecting." They sat there in the darkness, holding hands, not speaking, just being together. And Delilah felt something shift inside her. A door she had closed tight after Michael's death opening just a crack, letting in light and possibility. The next few days fell into a pattern. Garrett spent his days working at the Patterson Ranch and his evenings doing chores on his own property. Delilah cooked and cleaned and mended, and Samuel helped where he could, his arm healing well. At night, Garrett slept in the barn with his rifle, while Delilah lay in his bed and tried not to think about the fact that she was sleeping where he usually slept, surrounded by the faint scent of him on the pillow. The horse thieves did not return, but tension remained high. The sheriff came by to check on things, reporting that the gang had struck another ranch 10 miles away, making off with 6 horses. A posse had been formed to track them, but the thieves had disappeared into the mountains. "They'll come back eventually," the sheriff warned. "Men like that always do. Keep your guard up, Garrett." So Garrett stayed watchful, and Delilah found herself staying up later each night, sitting on the porch with him while he kept watch. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams for the future. She told him about growing up on a farm in Kansas, about marrying Michael and following him west in search of better opportunities. He told her about losing his parents, about the years of wandering from ranch to ranch before finally deciding to put down roots. "I was tired of drifting," he said one night, his voice thoughtful. "I wanted something that was mine, something I'd built with my own hands. This place, it's not much yet, but it's got potential. Good water, good grass, room to expand. I figure in 5-10 years I could have a real working ranch here, compete with the big outfits." "You'll do it," Delilah said with certainty. "You're the most determined person I've ever met. When you set your mind to something, it gets done." He smiled at that, pleased. "Takes one to know one. You've kept yourself and Samuel going through circumstances that would have broken most people. That takes strength and grit, or stubbornness." She laughed softly. "There were days I wanted to give up, pack what we had left and go back to Kansas, beg my brother to take us in. But I couldn't admit defeat. Pride, I suppose." "Not pride, courage." He shifted in his chair, turning to face her more fully. "Delilah, I need to say something, and I don't want you to feel like I'm taking advantage of the situation or being inappropriate, but I can't keep holding it in." Her heart began to race. "All right. I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. "I know it's fast, and I know you might not feel the same way, and that's all right, but I needed you to know. You're in my thoughts from the moment I wake until I fall asleep. You and Samuel, you've brought life to this place, made it feel like a home instead of just a house. And I want—" He paused, searching for words. "I want this to be real, not temporary. I want you to stay, not just until the trouble passes, but always." Delilah sat frozen, her mind reeling. Part of her wanted to tell him it was too soon, that she could not possibly know her own heart so quickly. But another part, the honest part, knew he was right. The feelings between them were real and deep and true. "I'm scared," she said finally. "I lost Michael, and it nearly destroyed me. The thought of loving someone again, of risking that kind of pain. I know. Believe me, I know." He reached for her hand again, holding it between both of his. "I can't promise you that we'll never face hardship or loss. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You'll never be alone again. That's worth something, isn't it?" She looked at their joined hands, thinking of all the moments that had led to this point. Finding Samuel lost and terrified. Garrett's calm competence in the crisis. The way he had looked at her son with genuine care. The way he had helped them without expecting anything in return. The long conversations on this porch, the laughter over supper, the feeling of safety and rightness that came from being near him. "It's worth everything," she whispered. Then louder, "I'm falling in love with you too, Garrett. It terrifies me, but it's true." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and for a moment they just stood there, looking at each other. Then he cupped her face in his hands, the gesture achingly tender, and kissed her. It was nothing like kissing Michael had been. That had been familiar, comfortable, the kiss of a friend and companion. This was fire and lightning, passion and promise all wrapped together. Delilah felt herself melting into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and all the fear and worry of the past months seemed to fall away, leaving only this moment, this man, this feeling of coming home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," she laughed, surprised. "That's fast, even for the frontier." "I don't care. I know what I want. I want you, and I want Samuel, and I want us to be a family. Say yes, Delilah." She should have said no, should have asked for more time, more certainty. But looking up into his eyes, feeling his hand still cradling her face with such gentleness, she could not find a single reason to wait. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I'll marry you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Delilah felt the last of her defenses crumble away. She was taking a risk, opening her heart again, but Garrett was right. Some things were worth the risk. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Trinidad, with Samuel standing beside them proudly holding the wedding ring Garrett had bought from the jeweler in town. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by a handful of friends and neighbors who had come to respect Delilah's strength and Garrett's decency. The horse thieves had been caught 3 days earlier by the sheriff's posse, and with that threat lifted, life had returned to a peaceful rhythm. Delilah had officially moved into Garrett's house, now her house too, and began to transform it into a true home. She planted flowers in the garden, made curtains for the windows, filled the shelves with preserves and pickles for the winter ahead. Samuel blossomed in his new life. Garrett formally adopted the boy 6 months after the wedding, giving him the Xander name and all the love and guidance a father should provide. Samuel never forgot Michael, and they kept his memory alive with stories and visits to his grave, but he learned to call Garrett Pa and looked at him with adoration and trust. The ranch grew and prospered under their combined efforts. Garrett's skill with horses and Delilah's business sense made them a formidable team. They expanded the operation, buying more land, breeding quality horses that became known throughout the territory. It was hard work, but they did it together, partners in every sense of the word. A year after their marriage, Delilah realized she was expecting a child. The news filled her with both joy and terror, memories of childbirth and the risks involved flooding back. But Garrett held her through the fear, promising to be there every step of the way. And when their son was born in the spring of 1880, healthy and howling with indignation at being brought into the world, Delilah thought her heart might burst with happiness. They named him Michael Garrett, honoring both the past and the present, and Samuel took to being a big brother with enthusiastic dedication. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Clara June, with her father's green eyes and her mother's determination. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and the sounds of family. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel grew tall and strong, learning the ranch business from Garrett and eventually taking on more responsibility. Young Michael showed a gift with horses even as a toddler, fearless and natural in the saddle. Clara turned out to be the bookkeeper of the family, keeping meticulous records of expenses and sales with a seriousness that made her parents smile. Through it all, Delilah and Garrett's love deepened and matured. They had their disagreements, certainly, their moments of frustration and struggle. Running a ranch was never easy, and raising children came with its own challenges. But they faced everything together, just as Garrett had promised that terrible day when Samuel was lost. On their 5th anniversary, they took a rare evening alone together, sitting on the porch where he had first told her he loved her. The ranch spread out before them in the golden light of sunset, the sounds of their children playing in the yard filling the air with music. "You ever regret it?" Garrett asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Marrying me so quickly, taking such a risk?" Delilah leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. Never, not once. You gave me back my life, Garrett. You and Samuel and all of this." She gestured at the ranch, the children, the home they had built together. "You kept your promise. I've never faced a fear alone since that day. And you never will." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Delilah Xander, more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too." She tilted her face up to his. "Thank you for finding Samuel that day. Thank you for finding us both. Best day of my life," he murmured against her lips before kissing her. "Well, second best. The day you married me beats everything." They sat together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the terror of losing Samuel in Trinidad, to the miracle of Garrett riding into her life, to this moment of perfect contentment surrounded by family and love. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving in many ways, but it had also given her gifts beyond measure. A man who loved her with his whole heart, children who filled her days with purpose and joy, a home built on partnership and respect. She had thought her story was over when Michael died, that she would simply survive from day to day without really living. But Garrett had shown her differently. He had shown her that the human heart had an infinite capacity for healing and growth, that love could bloom even in the hardest soil, that taking risks was sometimes the bravest and best choice a person could make. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Delilah closed her eyes and sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. For second chances, for new beginnings, for the cowboy who had found her lost child and then found a way into her heart, promising that she would never face her fears alone again. And he had kept that promise, every single day in 1,000 small ways and a few momentous ones. Through illness and health, prosperity and hardship, joy and sorrow, they had faced it all together. Partners, lovers, friends, the very best of what two people could be when they chose to build a life with intention and care. The children called for them then, Samuel's voice cracking with the beginnings of adolescence as he asked if they could roast marshmallows over the fire. Garrett laughed and stood, offering Delilah his hand to help her up. She took it, as she always did, feeling the calluses earned through honest work, the strength that had never been used to harm but only to protect and provide. They walked together toward the house, toward their children and the life they had created, and Delilah felt a sense of peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This was what happiness looked like, she realized. Not the absence of struggle or pain, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. The ranch continued to thrive as the years rolled on. By the time Samuel was 20, he was effectively running the day-to-day operations, having grown into a capable and responsible man who made his parents proud. He had his father's way with horses and his mother's business sense, a combination that served him well. Michael, at 16, was already showing signs of being an even better horseman than his brother, with patience and intuition that made the most difficult animals gentle under his care. He talked of starting his own breeding program, specializing in the Appaloosas that had first drawn his father to horse ranching. Clara, at 14, had become indispensable to the ranch's success. Her neat handwriting filled ledger after ledger, tracking every sale and purchase, every expense and profit. She also had a gift for negotiation, able to strike deals that left everyone feeling satisfied. More than one hardened cattle buyer had found himself agreeing to her terms with a bemused smile, wondering how a slip of a girl had gotten the better of him. Delilah watched her children with a mother's pride and a businesswoman's satisfaction. They were growing into fine adults, capable and confident, ready to face whatever challenges life brought them. And they did it with the security of knowing they were loved unconditionally, that they had a home and family to return to no matter what. As for her and Garrett, they had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a long marriage, the passion of their early years mellowing into something deeper and more sustaining. They still made each other laugh, still found excuses to steal moments alone together, still looked at each other across a crowded room and communicated whole conversations with just a glance. One evening in late autumn, nearly 10 years after their marriage, Delilah was preparing supper when Garrett came in from the barn with an odd expression on his face. "You'll never guess who just rode up." "Who?" She looked up from the pot she was stirring, curious. "Pete, from the livery in Trinidad. He's got a proposition for us." Pete came in a moment later, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Mr. and Mrs. Xander, thank you for seeing me. I'll get right to the point. I'm getting too old to run the livery and I'm looking to sell. But I wanted to go to someone I trust, someone who'll treat the animals right and serve the community well. I was hoping you might be interested." Delilah and Garrett exchanged glances. They had talked about expanding into town, about having a presence in Trinidad that would allow them to reach more customers. A livery stable would be perfect, giving them a place to showcase their horses and offering services that would benefit the whole community. "We'd need to talk it over, work out the finances," Garrett said slowly. "But yes, Pete, we're interested. Very interested." They worked out a deal over the next few weeks with Clara's help in analyzing the books and determining a fair price. Samuel agreed to manage the Trinidad property, moving into town and taking on the responsibility with his usual steady competence. It was a big step, expanding their operation, but it felt right. The night before Samuel was to move to town, Delilah found herself fighting tears as she helped him pack his belongings. Her firstborn, the boy she had nearly lost all those years ago, was leaving home. He was a man now, capable and ready, but she still saw the 5-year-old who had wandered away chasing horses, who had sat on that ledge in Fuller's Canyon crying for his mama. "I'll be fine, Ma," Samuel said gently, hugging her tight. "It's only 10 miles. I'll come home every Sunday for supper just like we planned. I know, I'm just being foolish." She wiped at her eyes, smiling through the tears. "I'm so proud of you, Samuel. Your father would be so proud too, both your fathers, I know." He kissed her cheek. "I won't let you down. Either of you. You never could," Garrett said from the doorway, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You're a good man, son. The best." The next day, they all rode into Trinidad together to help Samuel settle into the small apartment above the livery stable. As they worked to arrange his furniture and stock his kitchen, Delilah found herself remembering that terrible afternoon 10 years earlier, when she had stood on the street below crying out for her lost child. So much had changed since then. She had changed, transformed from a frightened widow barely surviving into a successful businesswoman, a wife, a mother of 3. The town had grown too, new buildings rising on once empty lots, more families settling in the area as word spread of opportunities in the mining and ranching industries. But some things remained constant. The mountains still loomed in the distance, beautiful and imposing. The sky still stretched wide and blue overhead, and the bonds of family still held strong, even as her children grew and began their own journeys. That evening, after leaving Samuel in Trinidad, Delilah and Garrett rode home with Michael and Clara. The younger children chattered about their brother's new venture, already planning their first visit to see him. Delilah leaned back against Garrett's chest, his arms around her as they shared a horse, and felt a contentment so complete it was almost overwhelming. "We've done well," she murmured. "Haven't we? We've done better than well." His voice rumbled against her back. "We've built something real, something that'll last. Our children, this ranch, the life we've made together. That's legacy, Delilah. That's immortality." She thought about that as they rode through the gathering dusk. He was right. Long after they were gone, their children would carry on, raising families of their own, teaching the next generation the values of hard work and integrity and love. The ranch would continue, growing and changing but remaining rooted in the partnership she and Garrett had forged. As they approached their house, lights glowing warm in the windows, Delilah felt a wave of gratitude so intense it took her breath away. 10 years ago, she had been broken and afraid, facing an uncertain future with only her determination to keep her going. Now she had everything she had never dared to dream of: a husband who adored her, children who made her proud, a successful business built on their combined efforts, and a home filled with love and laughter. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Michael courted and married a rancher's daughter from the next county, bringing her home to the family ranch, where he began his breeding program in earnest. Clara, surprising everyone, decided she wanted to study law, and Garrett and Delilah scraped together the money to send her east to school, proud of her ambition and determination. Samuel ran the Trinidad livery with skill and success, eventually marrying a schoolteacher and starting a family of his own. Delilah became a grandmother, holding Samuel's firstborn son and feeling the circle of life complete itself in a way that brought both tears and smiles. Through it all, she and Garrett remained the foundation, the steady center around which everything else revolved. They celebrated anniversaries and holidays, weathered droughts and hard winters, supported their children through triumphs and disappointments. They grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening on their faces, but their love never wavered or diminished. On their 20th anniversary, Garrett took Delilah on a trip to Denver, their first real vacation in all their years together. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate in restaurants, saw a theatrical performance. It was wonderful and exciting, but after 3 days, they both found themselves homesick for the ranch, for the familiar rhythms of their daily life. On the train ride home, Delilah sat with her head on Garrett's shoulder, watching the landscape roll past the window. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Samuel hadn't wandered away that day?" she asked suddenly. "If we had never met?" Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering. "I try not to think about it," he finally said, "because that alternative feels too empty, too lonely. But I believe we would have found our way to each other eventually, one way or another. Some things are just meant to be." "You really think so? You think we were destined to meet?" She looked up at him, curious about his answer. "I think we were two people who needed each other, and the universe conspired to make sure we found one another. Call it destiny, call it providence, call it dumb luck. Whatever name you give it, I'm grateful every single day that you walked into my life." He kissed her forehead gently. "You and Samuel, you saved me as much as I helped you. I was drifting before you came along, building a ranch but not really knowing why, working toward a future that felt empty because I had no one to share it with. And now," she already knew the answer, but she wanted to hear him say it, "now I have everything. A wife I love more with each passing year, children who make me proud, grandchildren to spoil, a business that thrives because we built it together. I'm the luckiest man alive, Delilah Xander, and it's all because a scared little boy wandered away one October afternoon, and I happened to be riding into Trinidad at just the right moment." She smiled and settled back against him, feeling the truth of his words resonate in her heart. They had been lucky, incredibly so. But they had also worked hard to build their luck into something lasting and real. They had taken the gift of finding each other and nurtured it with care and commitment, choosing each day to love and support and believe in one another. When they arrived home, the whole family was there to greet them. Samuel and his wife and children, Michael and his pregnant bride, Clara home from school for a visit. The house overflowed with noise and laughter and love. 3 generations gathered around the table for supper, sharing stories and making memories. Delilah looked around at all of them, her heart so full it ached, and caught Garrett's eye across the table. He smiled at her, that same warm smile that had greeted her on their wedding day and 1,000 days since, and she smiled back, a whole conversation passing between them in that single glance. "This is what we built," the glance said. "This is our legacy. These people, this love, this family. We did this together, and it was worth every moment of fear and struggle and sacrifice." Later that night, after everyone had finally settled down and the house grew quiet, Delilah and Garrett sat once more on their porch, looking out at the ranch spread before them in the moonlight. It was a sight she never tired of, the land they had worked and loved and poured their lives into. 20 years, Garrett mused. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Delilah reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically. Sometimes I still see that scared man who found my lost boy and promised me I'd never be alone again. And then I look at you now, gray in your hair and laugh lines around your eyes, and I see all the years between laid out like a map of where we've been. You have any regrets? He turned to look at her, his eyes serious. Anything you wish had been different, she thought about it carefully, wanting to give him an honest answer. I wish Michael, my first Michael, could have lived to see Samuel grow up. I wish my parents had survived long enough to meet you and the children. I wish some of the hard years had been easier, that we hadn't had to struggle so much in the beginning. But, he heard the unspoken word in her tone. But no real regrets. Because all of those struggles and losses made us who we are. They taught us to value what we have, to never take each other for granted. I wouldn't trade our life for anything, Garrett, not for an easier path or a more comfortable one. What we have is real and earned and precious beyond measure. He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. You're the wisest woman I know, Delilah Xander, and the strongest, and the most beautiful. She laughed at that. I'm 50 years old with gray hair and wrinkles and hands roughened by years of work. Beautiful is a stretch. You're beautiful to me. You always have been, from that first moment when you nearly knocked me over in the street, your eyes wild with fear for your boy. You took my breath away then, and you still do now. Beauty isn't about smooth skin or perfect hair. It's about strength and grace and the light that shines from within. And you, my love, are radiant. Tears pricked at her eyes, as they always did when he said things like this. After 20 years, he could still make her feel cherished and valued and deeply loved. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, and then we worked hard to keep that luck alive. He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. I love you, Delilah, for all the years behind us and all the years ahead. I love you too, always and forever. She closed her eyes, feeling perfectly at peace, perfectly content. This was happiness, she thought. Not the absence of sorrow or struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. It was building something lasting with another person, day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. The years continued their steady march forward. Clara graduated from law school and returned to Colorado, opening a practice in Denver but visiting home often. Michael and his wife welcomed 3 children in quick succession, filling the ranch with the sound of young voices again. Samuel's livery business thrived, and he eventually opened a second stable in a neighboring town, expanding the family's reach and reputation. Delilah and Garrett gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning more responsibility over to Michael while they enjoyed the fruits of their labor. They had earned the right to slow down, to spend lazy afternoons on the porch, to take rides through the countryside just for the pleasure of being together. But they never fully retired, could never quite bring themselves to stop contributing. Garrett still rose early to check on the horses, his first love. Delilah still kept her hand in the business side, reviewing books and offering advice when asked. They were partners to the end, unable to imagine a day when they would not be working side by side. On their 30th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration, children and grandchildren filling every corner of the house and spilling out into the yard. There were 15 grandchildren now, ranging from babies to young adults, and watching them play and laugh and grow together filled Delilah with a joy so profound it sometimes brought her to tears. Samuel, now 40, stood and offered a toast at the dinner table. "To Ma and Pa," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 30 years ago, you decided to take a chance on each other to build a life together from scratch. And look at what you've created. Not just a successful ranch, not just financial security, but this." He gestured around the table at the sea of faces. "Family, legacy, love that spans 3 generations and will continue for generations more. You taught us what commitment looks like, what partnership means, what real love can accomplish. Thank you for being the foundation we've all built our lives on." There was not a dry eye in the house after that. Garrett and Delilah held each other tight, overwhelmed by gratitude and pride and the sheer magnitude of what they had accomplished together. They had taken their fear and pain and turned it into something beautiful, something lasting. 2 broken people had found each other and made each other whole, and from that wholeness had sprung all of this. Love and life and family beyond measure. As the evening wore on and the party continued around them, Delilah found a quiet moment alone with Samuel. He had grown into such a fine man, tall and strong and capable, with his own children who looked at him with the same adoration he had once shown Garrett. "You remember that day?" she asked him. "When you got lost in the canyon, parts of it." Samuel smiled, though his eyes were serious. "I remember being scared, thinking I'd never find my way back to you. I remember Pa's voice calling my name, remember feeling so safe when he picked me up and carried me home. But mostly I remember what he said to you after." "What's that?" Delilah thought she knew, but she wanted to hear what had stayed with her son all these years. "He said you'd never face that fear alone again, and he meant it. I've watched him keep that promise every single day of my life. When things were hard, when money was tight, when the ranch almost failed that first year, when baby Clara was sick and you thought you'd lose her. Through everything, he was right there beside you, facing it all together. That's what I try to be for my wife and children. That's the man I want to be because that's the man who raised me." Delilah embraced her son, tears streaming down her face. "You are that man, Samuel. You're everything your fathers would have wanted you to be and more. I'm so proud of you." They stood there for a long moment, mother and son, the boy who had been lost and the woman who had found him, both of them marveling at the journey that had brought them to this place. From terror and desperation to this moment of perfect joy and completion. It was a long road, but they had walked it together, all of them, building something beautiful along the way. As the years advanced into Delilah and Garrett's 60s, the ranch continued under Michael's capable management, and they settled into a comfortable retirement. They still rose early, old habits being hard to break, but their days were quieter now, filled with simple pleasures. Tending the garden, reading together on the porch, taking slow rides across the property they knew and loved so well. Garrett's hair had gone completely silver, making his green eyes stand out even more, and he moved a bit slower than he once had, joints stiff from decades of hard work. But to Delilah, he was still the handsome cowboy who had ridden into her life one desperate October day and changed everything. Her own hair was white now, pulled back in the same simple style she had always favored, and her hands showed every year of work they had done. But she wore her age with pride, knowing each line and scar had been earned through a life fully lived. They celebrated 40 years of marriage surrounded by family, and then 45. They saw grandchildren marry and great-grandchildren born. They witnessed the ranch expand and prosper beyond their wildest early dreams. And through it all, they held tight to each other, still the foundation, still the center. One evening, sitting on their porch as the sun set in a blaze of color, Garrett suddenly said, "I want you to know something in case I don't get the chance to say it later." Delilah's heart clenched. "Don't talk like that. Hush, let me speak." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the passing years. "I want you to know that every single day I've spent with you has been a gift. Every laugh, every argument, every quiet moment, every challenge we've faced together. You've made my life richer and fuller than I ever thought possible. Finding you and Samuel that day, it was the moment everything changed. It was the moment I became who I was meant to be." "Garrett," she was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. "I mean it. You saved me, Delilah. Just as much as I helped you, maybe more. And if I could go back and live it all again, I wouldn't change a single thing. Except maybe I'd tell you I loved you sooner, ask you to marry me faster, waste less time being careful and proper." He smiled, his eyes bright with emotion. "But everything else, everything that matters has been perfect. You're perfect. We're perfect together." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into that single gesture. "I love you, Garrett Xander. You're the best thing that ever happened to me besides our children. You kept your promise every single day. I never faced a fear alone after you came into my life. You were always there, always strong, always steady. And I always will be," he promised. "For whatever time we have left, I'll be right here beside you." They sat together as darkness fell and stars appeared overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their journey from the beginning. And Delilah thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how tragedy could transform into joy, how loss could give way to love, how the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures. That terrified woman on the street in Trinidad, calling desperately for her lost child, could never have imagined this, could never have dreamed that the cowboy who found her boy would become her husband, her partner, the love of her life. Could never have pictured the ranch they would build, the family they would raise, the legacy they would leave behind. But it had all happened, every bit of it, because they had taken a chance. Because Garrett had looked at a frightened widow and seen someone worth caring for, worth protecting, worth loving. Because Delilah had been brave enough to open her heart again, to risk pain in pursuit of happiness. Because they had both chosen, day after day, year after year, to build something together. And what they had built was extraordinary. A love that had weathered every storm, grown stronger with each passing year, and created ripples that would extend far into the future through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They had started with nothing but determination and possibility, and they had created everything. As they finally rose to go inside, Garrett's arm around her waist, Delilah took one last look at the ranch spread out before them in the moonlight. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together, brick by brick, choice by choice, moment by precious moment. And it was perfect. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been real. Not because they had never struggled, but because they had faced every struggle together. Not because their love had been instant and effortless, but because they had worked every day to nurture it and help it grow in the end. That was what mattered most. Not the destination, but the journey. Not what they had accumulated, but who they had become. Not the individual moments, but the beautiful tapestry woven from all those moments together. They had been given a second chance at love and life and happiness, and they had seized it with both hands. They had transformed fear into courage, loneliness into companionship, desperation into hope. They had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, and had chosen to build something lasting and true. And as Delilah lay down to sleep that night, Garrett's arm around her as it had been for nearly 5 decades, she sent up one final prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had found her lost child all those years ago. The cowboy who had looked at her with those green eyes and promised she would never face her fears alone again. He had kept that promise, every single day, in 1,000 different ways. And she had kept her promise too, loving him with her whole heart, standing beside him through every joy and sorrow, building a life that was so much richer and fuller than anything she had dared to imagine. Together, they had created something beautiful. Together, they had found their happily ever after. And that, Delilah thought as sleep finally claimed her, was the greatest gift of all.